Thanks for joining and welcome to this Eskimi webinar. This is a specialized topic, how programmatic can work and how our platform and other programmatic platforms can be used for telecoms. I'll share the presentation with some visuals and cases and try to explain the topic. Since the topic is highly technical in some places, please do not hesitate to ask the questions. It's important that you understand how that works. So I'll start sharing my screen and we'll kick off. So first of all, a very brief intro into who are we and what is Eskimi and how we evolved over the years. The company has been around since 2006, and since we retained the same brand from that time, we had multiple products which evolved to the current programmatic platform. So we had a social network which was quite big in Southeast Asia and Africa. We had a payment product together with the telecoms in 2013. And then 5 years ago, we have launched our programmatic platform together with the data platform that is currently reaching out to more than 1 billion consumers worldwide. So the experience that we are bringing here comes from multiple markets. We have been working in the European markets, Middle Eastern markets, Asian and African markets, and this creates an experience baggage that we can bring bring to our clients and partners from a very different market in telecoms. In Europe, we're working with 50-50 postpaid and prepaid markets. In some of the Middle Eastern markets, it's mostly postpaid, and Africa and Asia has 95 or up to 99% of their consumers in prepaid, which creates a totally different dynamics in telecom marketing. So very briefly introducing the product itself, and then after that we'll move to the topic of how it can be used for telecoms. I'll try to explain this in the very kind of a simple schematic approach. So first of all, of course, as any programmatic platform, we have the supply or the traffic where we place our ads, and the supply comes either through our own direct integration with publishers, meaning sites and apps, or via our partnerships with the 45 and more exchanges. So the thing that, this works in a way that we basically connect to a website or an app via a kind of a wholesale approach where, let's take an InMobi or Teads or Pubmatic groups a certain level of publishers and gives the traffic to us. So as you see, those publishers are quite different. So some of them are mobile specialized. Some of them are more bringing the native ads. Some of them work on video and so on. And an important thing here is that we can reach out to all of them. And via those integrations, we can show the advertising and collect data from more than 2.5 million websites and apps. So supply is one, and the second layer is where we'll be talking more about this today, is data. So DMP is the platform which we can use for the collection of the data, organizing the data, and then when we're talking about the offline attribution, DMP is also used in this area. So DMP normally creates and collects a lot of data. So it's all the user browsing behavior, all the content interests, locations, a lot of technical information like IP address ranges, telecoms being used, devices, and so on. So when you organize this information, then you can start creating a data journey of the consumer and start using that for your business purposes. So we'll move into that later on. And then the third layer would be the creative part of it. How do you engage with the consumers? Of course, the traditional way to do that is the display ads, which are quite standard. But if we go to the more sophisticated means of reaching consumers, then you can do that via video, via native ads, via rich media, which engages the consumers much better. You can do click-to-action creatives, which especially is being used by the telecoms, like click-to-USSD and so on. So all of that basically ends that journey where you target the consumer, create the audience, and then on top of that, you want to reach out to the consumer, show the ad, and engage the consumer. So this is kind of the three-layered approach, which starts with supply, data, and creatives. And then there's a additional technology elements, or which kind of is created for specific purposes. So our platform supports the geofencing and location advertising. Our clients can run their own mini DMP solutions. There's a telco matching solution, which we'll talk about it today. You can run almost all media via the platform, via the single view platform, which allows you to not only run programmatic exchanges, but run your Facebook and Google campaigns via the same dashboard. And for specific purposes like retail, we have created footfall tracking technologies where you can actually measure how the people go to specific retail shops. And I mentioned rich media. So we have a vast catalog of different rich media formats, which, as we say, increases the ROI through engagement. So instead of a CTR, which is usually 0.3 to 0.5, you can reach up to 10% engagement rate, which kind of naturally increases the top of mind awareness and conversion. So yeah, we'll move to the topic right now. Just checking if there are any questions up until now about the product.
At the moment, no, Vytautas, thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. Good. So now, yeah, the question is how the programmatic platforms are relevant for telecoms. Apart from just being advertising platforms, reaching out to consumers, we have tried to utilize the stack in a much more focused manner. And first of all, of course, DMP plays a central role here. Just repeating what data points are being collected. So naturally, via all the impressions that happen, billions of impressions every day, we're able to know the IP address or IP range of the consumer. We know the location of the consumer. We can collect information like data consumption. So for example, we're able to say that this user consumes only 500 megabytes against another user who consumes 5 gigabytes. We know the interest of the consumer, so we know how to speak to them if we're providing a dynamic ad or personalized ad. And a lot of the other derived data points can be created, like socioeconomic class, work status, and so on. So all of that is combined in certain insights. But just for you to also imagine and understand how much data is being collected. So at least our platform processes around 300 billion impressions per month. And each impression and each data signal actually multiplies by almost 20 data attributes, which I mentioned as examples. So basically the processing power is around 6 trillion data signals per month. And I'm showing you these figures just to understand how representative this data can be. So sometimes we are asked, like, if we're creating a certain research dashboard for telecoms in certain market, how can we trust the data? So usually we have and we measure 50 to 60% of the consumption happening on mobile data, which gives us a pretty detailed and pretty accurate representation of what's happening in the market or with specific data segments. So this is really important to understand. And basically, as the first result of understanding the market better, we create those data consumption market dashboards. So we as a programmatic platform cannot know what's happening on voice or SMS consumption in the telecom world. But whenever the user browses online, we can start understanding this behavior. and then try to provide the dashboards for the telecoms in the way that they also think. Because if we go back 20 years, the data that the telecoms owned on their network, hasn't changed much in terms of just that the data consumption grew tremendously. So, but the telecoms always think in specific layers that they have to like increase the consumption of the existing users, reduce the churn and increase the loyalty of existing users, and then acquire new users. And then a lot of the data points fall into this, to achieve this goal, can be created for the telecoms to understand the market better. So I'm here, we'll share a couple of examples from these dashboards and then mention a couple of cases how it can help telecom marketing. So first of all, we understand that in some markets where it's like mostly prepaid, multi-SIM consumption is quite big. So in this case, an example is Indonesia, where we capture 140 million users and basically have certain data profiles around them. You can see that out of these 141 million users, 10% are actually SIM-less devices, so it's mostly tablets and laptops, and the rest are mobile SIMs. 20 million people have 2 SIMs, 3 million people are using 3 SIMs. So this multi-SIM behavior is quite active, and naturally this informs marketing decisions by the telecoms. I mean, they can understand how their consumers behave. They can understand that having a consumer doesn't mean that you command all the spend from that consumer and so on. So in this case, you can also go deeper and understand what are the telecom pairs. So in this case, Telkomsel and XL would be the most popular telecom pair, and then Indosat and Telkomsel would be the second. So these two telecoms can immediately start driving marketing strategies, how to either reduce the multi-SIM usage and actually get more usage onto their SIM card, which is much easier to do because the SIM card is already in the phone. So via certain offerings, they can already start doing that. But first of all, of course, knowing that information and understanding the market dynamics is very important. So using the same methodology and tweaking the business rules a bit, we can start understanding the migration situation. For example, we would know when the user has shifted a telecom and changed the SIM. So this happens at the specific business rule that we built for 14 days. So for example, if the user has been loyal to one telecom now and then moves to another telecom for 14 days and only uses the new telecom, we would treat that as a migration. And then the telecoms can behave differently. They can, start communicating to those customers after they left, because telecoms are already doing that. If the SIM consumption goes down, they will send an SMS and try to, give certain offers like data for free and so on. But in natural life, naturally, I mean, the SIM card is already somewhere in the drawer. And since we track the device and we're able to reach out to this consumer even after the consumer has changed the SIM, this can allow of certain win-back promotions by the telecoms. And from our case studies, what we see is that basically telecoms can get back around 20 to 25% of those consumers to their network. So also understanding your customer behavior via the loyalty and then the same multi-SIM consumption into bigger groups. So you can start understanding how many loyal consumers do you have, how many consumers are switching your telecom with one another, with the other ones, and so on, and how focused is your ARPU, and then how much ARPU can be increased by providing the right offers. The same goes to the device brands. Naturally, we track a lot of the information about the devices being used. So you can then also focus your targeting offers to specific device brands. If you're having a co-marketing campaign with devices, you can start engaging with this. Building certain socioeconomic class models or predicting customer data consumption, devices and device prices are actually very beneficial, because then you can start separating the consumers depending on device price. And in this case, for example, we can see how device prices are different in different telecoms. In this case, you can see that mostly the users are using the devices from $100 to $200, which is about 60% of the users. But if you have a specific data offer, an acquisition offer to only the high-end consumers, you might consider targeting consumers from $300 and above, which gives you a lot of savings on your marketing budget if you're speaking only to the right consumers. There has been a lot of shift in between the 3G and 4G, and I think this shift will happen towards new technologies as well. But naturally, since a lot of operators trying to move more consumption onto their LTE and 4G networks, this information is important. So, getting the right targeting towards those consumers and moving them to migrate from 3G to 4G, or combining the targeting criteria of the users, let's say, who still use 3G, but have a 4G capable handset. In some markets and for some telecoms, you have to switch to SIM. This data helps to target the right consumers as well. So just a very introductory data points, I guess, what kind of data can be collected. So let's see if you have any questions on this, and I'll go through the acquisition and offline attribution model.
Yes, Vytas, we have actually 2 questions for you. So one just appeared in the chat box. How do you spot 2G since they don't use data?
Well, 2G is an old GPRS and Edge. Well, Edge would probably be 2.75G if I remember correctly. But still, there are networks, especially in the rural areas where the base stations are not enabled, and they use the older devices and a very low quality internet. In some of the networks in Africa, 2G is still available, and in some cases it's actually Edge, and only after Edge then you actually move to the real 3G. So it depends on the namings, but in some markets up to 20% of the consumption still happens on that slow internet, where I don't know if you remember the WAP times, and naturally the internet technologies has progressed, but in rural areas the internet quality unfortunately is still in the 2G mode.
Then there is another question we just got in the Q&A box. How to move the audience from 3G to 4G network? Do you have any case studies on that one? Yeah, so I don't have it in the presentation, but as I mentioned, a lot of networks were concerned with the same. So we have done campaigns like this, and offline attribution can be used to measure the impact of those campaigns. The way that you do it is basically you just group people into certain segments. As I mentioned, as an example, you can target people who are currently owning 4G enabled devices but have never used 3G. So of course there are a couple of reasons. In some markets you do not have to switch to SIM. In some markets you have to. So for example, the campaigns that we have done where we target people with only 3G consumption, and we provide them click to map ads so that they would go to the nearest retail shop to change that SIM. So in 2G is the same. Again, in 2G probably the marketing is less sophisticated. You cannot use complex rich media examples because the devices are really simple, but they still browse data, and you can reach out to them via this channel.
But of course, the easiest way is to migrate people from 3G to 4G, especially when they already have the capable devices.
Okay, and one more question after which we can move on. Is there a propensity model of switchers in between networks?
I'm not sure if I understand the question or the context of the question, but I mean we can discuss this offline. In this case, what we use is the factual information because the consumption we register is on each impression level. So, for example, if we see that the consumer is currently using data, and let's say he consumes 500 megabytes of data, we would know how much of those megabytes go into one telecom, how much to another, how much is fiber, how much is maybe Wi-Fi networks just somewhere in the restaurant, and so on. So so that's the I mean for kind of assessing how users are switching, we mostly use factual information. To kind of, if you're asking about the prediction whether the user would switch, we use a different model for that, where we try to assess the risk users. Before they are switching, they always would test, right? Or there would be always that first or second day when the user is using another SIM. So this is where you know, certain data signals do not yet signal multi-SIM consumption, but you can already see that something is happening, and you can make certain decisions or create our audiences out of that. So so yes, thanks for the questions. I mean, we can move to some more questions later on. Yeah, so now moving to the acquisition and offline attribution. Basically, the question we are asking here is the same which John Wanamaker asked in the 19th century. Is that, you know, he said that half of the money spent on advertising, I spend on advertising, is wasted, but the trouble is that I don't know which half. So a lot of the telecoms are doing acquisition campaigns, and that marketing is quite broad. So you naturally use ATL, TV, radio, outdoor, and then when you use digital, the messages are quite broad. You try to reach all of the users and so on. But the question is, how do you know which messages work? How do you know which offers work well? How do you know if you have reached the right target audience, and so on? So these are the questions we started asking, and our clients from all those markets are starting asking us, and this is how we came up with this, with those answers and the platform. So getting back to the goals here, the key marketing goals for the telecoms are actually to retain the users, grow the spend and ARPU, and acquire new users. So if we can simplify it, that would basically be it. So I'll try to focus and split my my further discussion into that kind of targeting of the own consumers and then the acquisition of new. So so the question I would like to ask is, you know, how can you learn more about your consumers with the goal to actually retain them and grow their consumption? And I will argue that telecoms with current business intelligence units, with current data from consumption, only partly know their consumers. I mean, if it's a prepaid consumer, you would know the device, you would know the data plan used. You would see that this customer is generating a $3 ARPU. You would probably know age, if the country requires registration, location from the network base stations, and so on. But you would not know a certain invisible consumption which is happening in the device, but outside your SIM. And this consumption can be that, you know, he's using another SIM card, which he spends or she spends 70% of that ARPU, and that the total ARPU is actually more than $10. You would not see that, for example, if you are a dual play and you also offer fixed line services, you would not see that maybe this customer comes back home and uses a competition fixed line, where, you know, you could offer his you know, fiber network of your network operator. And you would also not know that, okay, yesterday, for example, he bought a new SIM and started testing another operator and is likely to switch. So this is where programmatic data can come into play, trying to bridge that gap into audiences. So an opportunity here is to merge programmatic and telecom data sets. And, you know, I kind of place those two databases here. And in between, there's a whole of like complicated ecosystem of identifying the users. So as you as telecoms identify your consumers via the MSCSDNs or the phone numbers, but this whole ad technology market is rather complicated, where phones have device IDs, DMPs, and other platforms have DMP IDs. Users browsing online have cookies, and all of those identifiers have different rules via different browsers, via different operating systems, and so on. So you know, how do you merge all that consumption and get to the truth? Basically, that is the big question. But it is possible to do. And if I can get back to my previous slide, it is possible to gain that visibility of your own consumers into audiences where you can start learning more about your current consumers. And what would this give you? Like, you know, there are many ways how to gain this data. Just to simplify it, I would just give you an example that there is a way, for example, to kind of pass a phone number of your current user to a specific API and then get back a certain data set that would signal that this particular user is using, you know, another telecom. You know, there's a certain fiber network used. You know, that he maybe or she started using another operator just right now. And then what you can do with that, and the use cases would be that you can, of course, improve your SMS and USSD information, because right now, if you see a certain behavior, you naturally slice your current audiences into many segments, and you send SMS, USSD information to them, communicate via your self-care app, and so on. Additional layer data set can help you to improve that communication. So if you, for example, know that this user is a multi-SIM consumer, there's one offer that you, I mean, the offer would be different from the one that is kind of a generic user. So so you can improve your own communication with the current user. You can expand the channels that you're reaching out, right? So for example, old school, 10 years ago, you would only be communicating via SMS and USSD with your consumers. Today, if the user is browsing on Facebook or the user is browsing on, you know, bbc.com or going to certain apps, you can extend that communication to that user via visual formats, via video, native ads, and so on. So your communication to your own consumers can become much more richer. And attribution as well can be very accurate, because if the consumer does something via the mobile and via the online channels, you would immediately see that on your own consumption internally with internal data. So these are the benefits that you can really you know, create by connecting those two data sets, what people do outside of your network, connecting that to the data that you have on the inside of your network. Do we have any questions on this topic?
We have a few questions from the chat box, actually. Does it require to integrate with operator network elements to get this data you've just talked about?
Okay, good question. Thank you. So yeah, the first data which I showed as an example from Indonesia, where it's all about the consumption. This is the data that we collect by when users are browsing and via our channels. So we can create those research dashboards without the telecom. But now, if you want to start connecting your data sets with the programmatic data sets, this is where the integration needs to happen naturally. So in this case, this integration needs to happen via certain identifier set. So it can be done by device IDs, it can be done by phone numbers. It depends on the country, it depends on regulation, it depends on some other factors. Basically, that the last things which I shown, you know, if you want to learn more about your consumers, naturally this requires an integration.
One more question from the Q&A box. If not merged with any telco data, can, oh, sorry, our colleague has just answered the question, but yeah, if not merged with any telco data, can we still see other SIM data usage and Wi-Fi usage?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, you can see that via research, and you cannot see that via individual consumer. So those examples which I shown, multi-SIM consumers, 3G, 4G, migrations, you know, Wi-Fi network use, all of that is available in those research dashboards and segments. You can target those consumers separately. For this, you do not need an integration because, you know, as I mentioned, if the user opens an app, plays a game, and you know, we reach that app via our channels, then we will be able to collect all data, including all the technical information like the range of the IP address, which we can attribute to a certain telecom and so on.
And I think we can address another one question and then move on with the rest of the presentation. What kind of telco data sets have you been able to integrate into your DMP? My experience is that telcos themselves are poor at collective native data about their customers.
Yeah, so again, we're talking about the stage where the integration happens. There were, and then like, if the question is what kind of data the telcos can include into the DMP, you know, usually what we need to achieve those things is we need just to do the matching correctly. And the matching happens between our IDs or the IDs of the customer when the customer is browsing online and the telecom IDs, whether it's a hashed phone number or a phone number in some way. So in these scenarios, the telecoms do not need to give us any data towards our DMP, or they do not upload any data. They usually match the users so that basically the name or the ID of the user on the telecom side and on our side would be the same. And then they would, you know, pull out the data for their targeting or to improve their messaging and communication and so on. There are instances where the telecoms understand that they want to participate in the ad tech market, and they understand that maybe they own valuable data sets which they want to sell to other participants of the market. In this case, telecoms can push the data. Again, we need to find a common identifier with the telecom. If we're able to do so, then the telecoms can start updating the data sets, and these data sets can then be used by other consumers. So an example would be a travel segment, and the telecom naturally has a lot of data about the traveling, roaming consumers, and so on. They might create the segment, push it towards the ad tech ecosystem, where then maybe airlines can start using it, or you know, travel companies and so on. So, I mean, this could be potentially the scenario when the telecoms need to push data to the external DMP. Okay, but let's move on. So yeah, excuse me, just need to close it. Yeah, so talking about the new consumers now, and where the attribution, you know, starts to be very important. So the question is how to acquire the right new consumers. And when the telecoms are doing acquisition, as I mentioned, they're taking a very broad approach. So basically just, you know, talking to all the consumers via all publishers. My suggestion is always to be more targeted in this way, you know, derive a specific messaging to multi-SIM consumers, target data consumers, which consume a lot of data differently, maybe focus on socioeconomic classes, maybe include device and device price, maybe include roaming status. All of that is possible when using all those data sets. And this is basically the customer optimization or customer acquisition cycle. And I'll get back to this in a couple of slides, but what we suggest is that before running a campaign, first of all, you have to identify the right consumer set and the right audiences. Then, of course, using all the technology and media tools, target and acquire them. And of course, you have to know whether that worked. So, you have to attribute for success, and then out of 10 campaigns that you have run, understand which ones worked the best. And the first step, of course, is to identify those consumers. And I already gave you many examples before with the data set. For example, you want to target users who already use your SIM, but maybe it's currently a secondary SIM, getting only maybe 30% of the data ARPU, and you want to become #1. So this is a use case of how you identify those consumers, and you want to reach out to them via online campaign. Then when you do that, when you select those consumers, and for example, you see that there are 2 million consumers which has your SIM as a secondary SIM, you use programmatic channels to target them and acquire them. So basically what you do is you show an advertising message to them and collect those people to specific audience buckets. So for example, you say, I have located 2 million consumers who are using my SIM as a secondary SIM. I want to target them. My goal is to reach at least 65% of those consumers. And then when I reach them, when I show an ad to them, I want to mark them as a special audience, and then afterwards check them how actually they behaved after they seen the ad, after they clicked on the ad, after they engaged with your landing pages, and so on. So then we move to the attribution part. So now basically we have already selected our audience. We have shown an ad to them. We have marked those users which seen our ad. The question is, how do we attribute and learn? So this is done by a lot of machine learning algorithms which try to determine what's happening with the consumer after they have seen the advertising. Of course, there are certain control groups involved, understanding how are the other consumers behaving. But if we could simplify that to the step, after you have identified the users, shown an ad, acquired the users, the third step is to measure what happened with them. So what we do in these cases, post-campaign, usually about 2 weeks after the campaign, we check what were the changes with those audiences which were exposed to certain marketing messages. And of course, what we see is that not only if they're seeing the ad, but also if they have clicked on the ad, if they have spent some time in the website, if they have done any kind of online conversion and some other steps and so on. So this is an important third step to measure whether this happened. And this is a very kind of simple visualized ad, where you can see how basically this can work. So if you're doing a campaign on day one, the user browses with Telecom X, then user engages in certain campaign, meaning sees the ad, let's say like this rich media ad, which is displayed here. What we actually need to do is that we need to get back to the DMP after certain period of time, usually 14 days, and check what has happened with that particular user. So what we're looking for is basically a changed consumer habit. So instead of one current SIM, maybe the consumer is already using another one. Maybe out of a secondary SIM consumption, it has moved to a primary SIM consumption. Maybe it has stayed the same. Maybe the user has started using 4G or any other outcome that we're looking for. So basically, when we talk about attribution, we are looking for this very simplified three-step approach. We do something, we run a campaign, we try to target consumers, then we measure them into specific audiences, and we check if there's any consumption change that happened. So if you look at the funnel analysis of all that process, so first of all, you identify, you target, you acquire, then you measure it post-campaign. And there's another very important point, which a lot of our telecom clients stress to us, is that they need to connect to the data points that matter to them. So I'm just giving here a very simple example of how that could potentially work. So, you know, if you're identified your target audience as 5 million consumers, let's say, you know, you want to do an acquisition of from competition, and these 5 million are those which have a specific device set and you know, has a specific data consumption you know, pattern and so on. Then naturally you cannot reach all of them, so you have reached via a campaign that you ran, you have reached 3 million of them. You have acquired based on our DMP 50,000 of them, again, and as an example. But usually these 50,000 consumers are based on our DMP IDs or device IDs and the identifiers that we have. But for the telecoms, what they need to know is they need to check if the phone number actually just appeared in their network, or the phone number that they were targeting has changed in consumption. So that's why we are adding the last layer, where out of these 50,000, we are able then to collect at least a small sample of phone numbers, which we then share with the telecom, and they are able to verify whether the segment that we provided is correct and whether the action or the outcome that we were aiming is actually correct and it happened. So basically this process closes the loop and is able to then answer the question, which of the campaigns worked, which of the campaigns acquired most of the users, which of the campaigns moved the needle into the outcomes that you were targeting. So you know, with this example, you know, I will end my presentation, and I see that there are some additional questions, and I will be able to answer them. Do we have any questions, Monica? Or I see that
yes.
All of 28 of them are answered already.
Yes, together with our colleagues, we have answered some by writing back to those people who have asked them. And actually, we have answered all of them.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we are aiming to wrap up in 45 minutes. So we have overran by 3 minutes. So if anyone has any more questions, yeah, so if anyone has any more questions regarding markets, you can reach out to the emails provided here, or through our website, which is business.eskimi.com. So I see the question about Myanmar. I mean, yes, we have that for Myanmar as well as for Southeast Asian markets, Middle Eastern markets, a lot of the European markets, African markets, and so on. So yeah, so that's the, and then we can answer all the other questions regarding those in the private chats. I will answer just one last question. How does Eskimi compare to other DSPs in the market? I guess if you, I guess the answer is not only about the DSP. My answer would be that we try to focus on specific industries to solve specific problems. So the reason of this webinar as well is to share our thoughts and the ideas of how telecoms should use programmatic. Naturally, we have the data sets for device manufacturers, for FMCGs, automotive, and the strategies there would be completely different. So I think you know, the difference is that if you take out only the DSP, which is the ad serving and the reach element, this has become a commodity, and a lot of the DSPs are offering very similar offerings. So if you want just to reach out to your consumers, you can choose any of the DSPs. The difference comes is how do you specialize and where do you specialize? We decided to specialize on certain segments like the telcos, as I mentioned, and there are some other industries where we try to do so. And I think there we have invested a lot of time We have a lot of case studies from other telecoms, and I think in the telecom space we can really help. You know, in some other markets as well, like device manufacturers, automotive, and so on. Our rich media stack, you can check this out and compare. But yeah, we aim to be a full stack programmatic platform, which allows us to try to cover a lot of the needs in the market, and we try to specialize. So I think, you know, that's that is the answer here. And yeah, maybe one last one is, how do we get the sample phone numbers to telco to verify? So in this case, of course, we need help of telecom. So there's a process which is called header enrichment, which telecoms has used long time back in their vast markets and so on. In this case, if the telecom allows us to see those consumers, and some telecoms do not give us the phone numbers, but they give us the hashed IDs of the consumers to keep the privacy. So they can also work. But yeah, so basically they have to expose this data point to us. Via this, we can then provide samples. If this is not available and the audiences is quite large, we also use our survey system, which allows us to kind of, you know, target that particular audience and get those phone numbers so that we would be able to share them. So yeah, so I think we answered a lot of questions, and I would like to thank you all for joining us and investing this 1 hour to learn about the tools of Programmatic for telecoms. If you have any other questions, please reach out through email, website, LinkedIn, maybe the team members that you already know. And you know, I hope we can answer your questions on other channels as well. So yeah, and thank you, Monica, for helping me with this webinar. So I think we can say goodbye to the audience now.
Yes, my pleasure. And for the participants that are still on this webinar, you can also follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook, because we usually post this information about webinars online. So you will be able to see our future activities as well. Thank you very much, everybody. And thank you, Vytautas, as well, for this astounding webinar and sharing this information with everybody.
Great. Thank you. It was my pleasure. Have a nice day. Stay safe, everyone.